This is a quick video on decimals and percents. Percent means per hundred or divided by 100. So per by itself can also mean divided by. And cent is like centennial or 100 cents in a dollar. Cent means 100. So percent divided by 100. So if we look at the example of converting 40% to a decimal, then we can note that 40% is the same thing as 40 divided by 100, which is 0.4. So if you did 40 over 100, say in your calculator, you'd get 0.4, or just moving the decimal over two places when you divide by 100, you would get 0.4. And so 0.4 is the decimal equivalent of 40%. Similarly, if we were converting 8% to a decimal, that means 8 divided by 100, 8 divided by 100. And when we divide by 100, we move the decimal place two place values to the left, and we would get 0.08. So 8% as a decimal is 0.08, 40% as a decimal is 0.4. So we see above that when we convert a percent to a decimal, what we're really doing is moving the decimal point two places to the left and removing the percent sign. So for example, if we have 40%, there's really a hidden decimal point right there. We're moving that hidden decimal point two places to the left and removing the percent sign. So we have 0.40, and we could rewrite that as just 0.4 if we wished. Any decimal number really has infinitely many hidden zeros following it, and we can express them, we can write them in front, or we can just leave them off. Similarly, if we are converting 8% to a decimal using this method, there's a hidden decimal place right there. We're moving it 2 spots to the left. And now we have 0.08 as the decimal equivalent of 8%. Okay, so to do the reverse, to convert a decimal to a percent, we can just reverse our process. So before we divided by 100%, now we can multiply by 100%. Or the other way of doing it was to move the decimal place 2 spaces to the left and take away the percent sign. Now we can instead move the decimal place 2 spaces to the right and include the percent sign. So these are the same operation. So if we say we want to convert 0.67 from a decimal to a percent, then we could multiply it by 100%. And when you multiply by 100, you are moving the decimal place 2 places to the right, 67, and adding a percent sign. If we were converting 0.063 from a decimal to a percent, then we would be multiplying it by 100%, and that's equivalent to moving the decimal place 2 places to the right and adding a percent sign, so that's 6.3%. Okay, here are a couple of examples for you to try. Convert 0.20 from a decimal to a percent, convert 0.52% into a decimal, and convert 0.012 from a decimal into a percent. So I'd encourage you to pause the video at this point and try these on your own, and then we will go over them together in just a moment. Okay, so when we convert 0.20 from a decimal to a percent, that means that we are multiplying by 100%. So in other words, we are moving the decimal place 2 places to the right and adding a percent sign, so we get 20%. When we convert 0.52% to a decimal, that means that we are dividing 0.52 by 100 and getting rid of the percent sign, dividing by 100%. So we could think of it like that. And so that means that we are taking 0.52 and moving the decimal places 2 places to the left, dividing by 100. And we would then have 0.0052 is our decimal value that's equivalent to 0.52%. Finally, converting 0.012 to a percent, that means that we are taking 0.012 to 0.012 and multiplying it by 100% to convert it to a percent. Multiplying it by 100 is equivalent to moving the decimal place 2 places to the right and adding a percent sign, so that's 1.2%. And those are those examples. Now let's look at finding a percent of a particular number. So of means multiply. And so in this example, if 800 adults were polled and 25% of them skipped breakfast, how many of those 800 adults skipped breakfast? Well, that means that we would take 800 and multiply by 25%, or really multiply by the decimal equivalent of 25%. So we would multiply 800 by the decimal equivalent of 25%, which is 0.25. So multiplying 800 by 0.25, you could do that in 2 different ways, or at least 2 different ways. We could say 800 times 0.25, either by hand or in a calculator. And in either case, you would end up with 200. Another option is you might say to yourself, I know that 0.25 is the same as a quarter, and it's pretty easy to take a fourth of 800. 800 times 1/4 is, well, we could cancel out the 4 and some of the 8, and we'd be left with 2. We'd be left with 1 here. So we just get 200. But in either case, 200 adults skipped breakfast. You could either use mental math or use a fraction, or use multiplication by hand, or use multiplication by a calculator. Any of those is fine, but 200 of those adults skipped breakfast. So let me give you another example to try. The US population is approximately 330 million. If about 5% of Americans get the flu each year, how many people is that? So I'd again encourage you to pause the video for a second and try this yourself. Get out a piece of paper, get out a calculator, get out whatever you would like to use, and we'll go over the answer together in just a moment. Okay, so about 5% of Americans get the flu each year, and there are 330 million Americans. There are different ways that you could approach this, but in general, what you're going to be doing is taking 330 million, which you could also represent this way, 330 million, and multiplying it by the decimal equivalent of 5%. 5% is the same thing as 0.05, so multiplying by 0.05. So how to do this? You could do it with by hand. You could do it with a calculator. You could do it with mental math. So calculator is totally fine. You could also do some mental math here instead if you wanted. And if you were doing that, the way I would walk through this problem is to say, okay, 0.055% is half of 10%. So I would first find 10% of this value, find 10% of 330 million. And if I found 10%, that would be equal to, well, taking just 1 0 off. So 10% of 330 million is 33 million. But I don't actually want 10%, I want 5%. 5% is half of 10%. And so I could now divide by half or divide by 2 in order to get just the 5%. So divide by 2 to get 5%. And that would give me 33 divided by 2 is 16.5. So 16.5 million, or that's the same thing as 16500,000. So that's two different ways to arrive at the same answer. If you try that in your calculator and just plug this into your calculator, you will get this. So whichever way you choose, you could also try by using mental math and then plug into your calculator just to check your answer. So for the last topic of this video, we'll find what percent a value is of a total. To find this, we divide the value by the total and then convert to a percent. So as an example, in a study of 400 individuals, 80 of them said they slept at least 8 hours a night. What percentage of this group slept at least 8 hours a night? So for us, we would take the smaller group divided by the total divided by 400. And again, we can either do this in a calculator or we could use some mental math. Either way is totally fine. If we were doing it with mental math, we could get rid of those zeros. And so we have 8 divided by 40. And then, 4 is 10% of 40. So 8 is 20% of 40. So this would be 0.2. If we either divided it in a calculator, or the same thing as 0.2 is move the decimal place 2 places over, 20%. So 20% of the group slept at least 8 hours a night. If you did that in a calculator, again, you would get the decimal 0.2, and then you would want to convert it to a percent. Let me give you another one to try. So here the numbers are larger, but the process is exactly the same. So these are values from Wikipedia. The 2019 U.S. federal budget spending was $4,500 billion, or $4.5 trillion, and approximately $100 billion was spent on education. What percentage of the 2019 federal budget was spent on education? So try this out, pause the video, and we will look at it together in just a moment. Okay, so let's try this out together. So the total spending was $4.5 trillion, or $4,500 billion, and the amount spent on education was $100 billion. So we're trying to figure out what percent $100 billion is of $4,500 billion. So we're trying to figure out what percent is $100 billion out of the total. One option is that you could just put this directly into a calculator. To put this directly into a calculator, of course, a calculator doesn't understand billion, so you could put in all the zeros. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros for both the top and the bottom additional. So 4, 5, 0, 0, and then we're adding 9 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros all together. So when you're dividing out, you can get rid of anything that's in common. So we could get rid of all those. So, I'm saying, if you're doing this in a calculator, then you need to actually use all those zeros. But if you're kind of doing it as mental math, you can get rid of it as you wish, or mental math / by hand. And so this reduces down to just 1 out of 45. So this reduces down to 1 out of 45. Again, if you were using kind of a mental math estimate, you could say at this point, that's about 1 out of 50. That's pretty close to 2%. But if you wanted to get an exact value, at this point, you could either divide by hand or use a calculator. And if you use a calculator, you will get 0.0222 repeating. And so you want to convert that 0.0222 repeating into a percent, because that's what we are asked for. So we would move the decimal place over 2 place values and put in a percent sign. This is 2.22 repeating percent. We could just leave it with 2 decimal places. So 2.22%, about 2% of the federal budget in 2019 was spent on education. One last thing to note, as we see with those crossed out zeros, we could have also just done 100 divided by 4,500. We could have essentially left off the billions and just continued the same way that we did on the right. And so with all of these, again, you can use a calculator, you can do it by hand, you can use a combination of mental math and your calculator. Whatever works best for you is totally fine.